Abbiamo qui oggi Homi Bhabha, docente di inglese e teoria postcoloniale all'Università di Harvard. È una grandissima occasione perché Homi Bhabha è stato uno dei grandissimi teorici del postcoloniale. Negli anni 90 si pensava a Said, Bhabha e Spivak come la grande trinità, no? Nel campo della teoria postcoloniale, quindi averlo qui oggi è davvero un grandissimo onore. È anche un'occasione per mettere insieme, per me personalmente, vari cappelli, quello mio di prorettrice che condivide con l'Ateneo, con la città dei saperi importanti per l'oggi, quello mio di ricercatrice perché ho seguito Bhabha fin dai primi anni 90 e ho portato gli studi postcoloniali qui a Padova quando ancora in Italia non erano noti. Per la mia didattica, per la didattica di questo Ateneo, perché io insegno accanto a letteratura contemporanea di lingua anglofone, del globo anglofono, anche teoria e cultura postcoloniale. Quindi questo per me è un momento importante ed è questo il motivo per cui ho invitato qui i miei studenti di magistrale oggi, che hanno sempre trovato i saggi di Bhabha piuttosto oscuri e quindi avranno l'occasione per parlarne di persona. Credo che sia un valore aggiunto, no? a come abbiamo lavorato tra l'altro benissimo quest'anno. Hanno preparato le loro domande sul postcoloniale, su chi è Bhabha nella vita vera e non solo in quella accademica.
So obviously you know that we had this course, especially regarding postcolonial studies, and in this course we tackled even papers of Said and Frantz Fanon. So we were actually curious about what was your relationship with said authors and what kind of trivia you could tell us even about your personal relationship with them.
Well, I don't like to put a lot of material on the Wikipedia page, as you are aware. I don't think that's the best way because half of it is anyway wrong. I had a living relationship with Edward Said. I had of course, a long-standing intellectual relationship with Frantz Fanon, which continues to this day. I was speaking at the presidential panel of the MLA 2 years ago, and I went back to Frantz Fanon in order to go forward. So I'm trying to do some work which I'll introduce to you on the question of living death, as I call it, in a number of different discourse, and I can come to that. But in that context, I had to give this MLA presidential thing, and I went back to Fanon in order to go forward to James Baldwin and Ta-Nehisi Coates and a number of contemporary African-American writers, but also writers who work on caste in India, the Dalit writers. I'm very interested in thinking about political, cultural, and ethical agency as it emerges in difficult situations where you don't expect to find it.
Such as?
Well, such as those who are transfixed by the racial gaze and have no freedom to actually develop a sense of their autonomy, or indeed in the recent migration crisis, those who have to make choices where risk is predominant, where death is on your shoulder, and yet you do it. You have to make a decision. You make a decision which is responsible. So I'm interested in how those moments have within them a sense of ethics, a sense of dignity, but under duress. This is not dignity as you read it in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a dignity based on moral intuitionism, that somehow we all know, because we're human beings, that we have a dignity, an inherent dignity, but we also know, because we are human beings, and this is what is called in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the second notion of birth, which is that we are all born into a moral universe that we somehow intuitively know in an unmediated fashion. The reason for that, of course, in the drafting of the Universal Declaration was they did not want anybody to be able to appeal to historical relativism and say, well, we did this in 1939, or we did this in 1944, or we are doing this in 2018. But at that time the circumstances were different. So so they wanted to get rid of that. But what they also got rid of is the forms of history, the forms of time that are very compressed and are very problematic, and you've got to make certain decisions. And these decisions are not simply irrational, or they're not instinctive. There's a moral balance in those two. So I'm interested in that, and Fanon is particularly important to me because with his interest in psychoanalysis and so on, he often talked about the human subject as an agent that had to contest these kinds of temporalities of desperation in order to construct a sense of the self, the other. I'm trying to think about the notion of the burdened life, and it's still a concept that I'm working through. But where you're absolutely, I think you've hit the point, is that for Fanon, if you remember, the person of color, the discriminated, the minority, you can say this also about the current migration, there is so much imposed upon you, as he says, there is so much projection on you that before you can begin to construct some ontological sense of oneself, one has to deal with this burden. But on the other hand, the burden is also the burden of history. You can't just wish it away. So you have to find a way of taking it, using it, reversing it charismatically, and then working through a question of identity. Now, why does economic distress have to symptomatically present itself in these phenomenological ways? And that is the question we have to understand, and I think we have to ask ourselves. And the question is not simply because you've got a different color of skin. The question is not different because your English is different. There is some profound kind of issue, and I think the issue is that we don't speak enough about affect in the political institutional sense, not simply in the emotional sense.
It's just that if you are actually considering politics, something else that comes to mind, by constitution, we live in a republic that is based on labor, and that labor should give us the ability to live dignified.
Yeah.
There's the word dignity in the constitution, and yet I speak with students either my age or older that cannot actually afford living because they are not paid, not even the 200 euros Romanian are paid, for instance.
If there is a third space, the third space now to think through is the following problem. And I will take it back to the 2018 elections, but I can also take it to Brexit, maybe in Italy now also. I think there is a certain democratic exhaustion. And I think the democratic exhaustion, to some extent, is economic. Because, as you say, constitutional, legal rights offer you all kinds of things, but you try and get them, the market doesn't provide them. And I think this democratic exhaustion has created a situation where we have what I call a tit-for-tat democracy. Everybody wants to be part of this democratic conversation, but nobody has defined anymore what the rules of the game are. Which means that political discourse is polarized. The enemy of the third space, if you like, is so polarized that there are no rules for the negotiation anymore. Brexit, most people said, the real flashpoint, the symptom, were immigrants. Maybe from Eastern Europe rather than necessarily, but immigrants, migration. The campaign in the United States was fought so much on Mexican murderers, Muslim terrorists, lazy people who was so much on that. So I think that party politics has really changed now, and we are in a movement, we are in a place of movement politics. The difference is that those constitutional rules, that rule keeping, that game, that has really been destroyed. And when people say, well, in the United States now, Hillary won the popular vote, it was a narrow margin, Brexit is a narrow margin, the Indian elections were a narrow margin, so that the left are on one side, generally liberal left, and the conservatives on the other. I say these are not margins, these are not narrow margins, these are not divisions. These are like seismic cracks in an earthquake. And of course there's a division of people, but in each camp there are further divisions. There's a real lack of this democratic confidence, or what we would call trust, or what we might call exhaustion, on each side. And in that third space now, you begin to get these movement politics.
We would like to know whether gender studies have influenced your work, you and your work, or whether and how.
Well, I always say that my life has been, professional life has been created by women, which is actually true, including this invitation here. But it is literally true at Oxford. It was, this woman who did gender studies, and Henry James, I was very interested in. She said, she's the one. I was going to go back to India and make films and write journalism, and said, no, you've got to continue. So I've had this set of people all the time. But gender studies, I can answer. So that's a more ad hominem, since you say that on my Wikipedia page there is no personal information. Let me give you some. But in fact, the reason why I say gender studies had a major effect on me was that I learned many of the methods that I started working with initially, psychoanalysis, discourse analysis. I learned all that through feminist writers. The channel for me came from feminist writers, but there were some men amongst them too. They were not all women, but feminist writers who were writing about cinema, psychoanalysis, the notion of the figura, the notion of the body in pop. So I have a very special debt to gender studies, because that's how I actually began to think about problematizing the question of race.